Beware of the guile of Morgoth, whose strength was always greater than it seemed, and his purpose other than he revealed. And though the signal of the approach of Maedhros came not, and the host grew impatient, Húrin urged them still to await it, and to let the orcs break themselves in assault upon the hills. But the captain of Morgoth in the west had been commanded to draw out Fingon swiftly from his hills by whatever means he could. He marched on, therefore, until the front of his battle was drawn up before the stream of Sirion, from the walls of the fortress of Aethel Sirion to the inflowing of Rivil at the fen of Serech. And the outposts of Fingon could see the eyes of their enemies, but there was no answer to his challenge, and the taunts of the orcs faltered as they looked upon the silent walls and the hidden threat of the hills. Then the captain of Morgoth sent out riders with tokens of parley, and they rode up before the outworks of the Barad Aethel. With them they brought Gelmir, son of Gwilin, that lord of Nargothrond, whom they had captured in the Bragolach, and they had blinded him. Then the heralds of Angband showed him forth, crying, "We have many more such at home, but you must make haste if you would find them, for we shall deal with them all when we return, even so." And they hewed off Gelmir's hands and feet, and his head last, within sight of the elves, and left him. By ill chance, at that place in the outworks, stood Gwyndor of Nargothrond, the brother of Gelmir. Now his wrath was kindled to madness, and he leapt forth on horseback, and many riders with him, and they pursued the heralds and slew them, and drove on deep into the main host. And seeing this, all the host of the Noldor was set on fire, and Fingon put on his white helm, and sounded his trumpets, and all the host of Hithlum leapt forth from the hills in sudden onslaught. The light of the drawing of the swords of the Noldor was like a fire in a field of reeds, and so fell and swift was their onset, that almost the designs of Morgoth went astray. Before the army that he had sent westward could be strengthened, it was swept away, and the banners of Fingon passed over Anfauglith, and were raised before the walls of Angband. Ever in the forefront of that battle went Gwyndor and the elves of Nargothrond, and even now they could not be restrained. And they burst through the gate, and slew the guards upon the very stairs of Angband, and Morgoth trembled upon his deep throne, hearing them beat upon his doors. But they were trapped there, and all were slain, save Gwyndor only, whom they took alive, for Fingon could not come to their aid. By many secret doors in Thangorodrim, Morgoth had let issue forth his main host that he held in waiting, and Fingon was beaten back with great loss from the walls. Then, in the plain of Anfauglith, on the 4th day of the war, there began, near Nath and Oidiad, unnumbered tears, for no song or tale can contain all its grief. The host of Fingon retreated over the sands, and Haldir, lord of the Haladin, was slain in the rear guard. With him fell most of the men of Brethil, and came never back to their woods. But on the 5th day, as night fell, and they were still far from Ered Wethrin, the orcs surrounded the host of Hithlum, and they fought until day, pressed ever closer. In the morning came hope, when the horns of Turgon were heard as he marched up with the main host of Gondolin. For they had been stationed southward, guarding the pass of Sirion, and Turgon restrained most of his people from the rash onslaught. Now he hastened to the aid of his brother, and the Gondolindrim were strong and clad in mail, and their ranks shone like a river of steel in the sun. Now the phalanx of the guard of the king broke through the ranks of the orcs, and Turgon hewed his way to the side of his brother. And it is told that the meeting of Turgon with Húrin, who stood beside Fingon, was glad in the midst of battle. Then hope was renewed in the hearts of the elves, and in that very time, at the 3rd hour of morning, the trumpets of Maedhros were heard at last coming up from the east, and the banners of the sons of Feanor assailed the enemy in the rear. Some have said that even then the Eldar might have won the day, had all their hosts proved faithful, for the orcs wavered, and their onslaught was stayed, and already some were turning to flight. But even as the vanguard of Maedhros came upon the orcs, Morgoth loosed his last strength, and Angband was emptied. There came wolves and wolf riders, and there came balrogs and dragons, and Glaurung, father of dragons. The strength and terror of the great worm were now great indeed, and elves and men withered before him. And he came between the hosts of Maedhros and Fingon, and swept them apart. Yet neither by wolf, nor by balrog, nor by dragon would Morgoth have achieved his end, but for the treachery of men. In this hour, the plots of Ulfang were revealed. Many of the Easterlings turned and fled, their hearts being filled with lies and fear. But the sons of Ulfang went over suddenly to Morgoth, and drove in upon the rear of the sons of Feanor, and in the confusion that they wrought, they came near to the standard of Maedhros. They reaped not the reward that Morgoth promised them, for Maglor slew Uldor the Accursed, the leader in treason, and the sons of Bor slew Ulfast and Ulwath, ere they themselves were slain. But new strength of evil men came up that Uldor had summoned, and kept hidden in the eastern hills, and the host of Maedhros was assailed now on 3 sides, and it broke, and was scattered and fled this way and that. Yet fate saved the sons of Feanor, and though all were wounded, none were slain, for they drew together, and gathering a remnant of the Noldor and the Naugrim about them, they hewed a way out of the battle, and escaped far away towards Mount Dolmed in the east. Last of all the eastern force to stand firm were the dwarves of Belegost, and thus they won renown. For the Naugrim withstood fire more hardily than either elves or men, and it was their custom, moreover, to wear great masks in battle, hideous to look upon, and those stood them in good stead against the dragons. And but for them, Glaurung and his brood would have withered all that was left of the Noldor. But the Naugrim made a circle about him when he assailed them, and even his mighty armor was not full-proof against the blows of their great axes. But when in his rage Glaurung turned and struck down Azaghal, lord of Belegost, and crawled over him, with his last stroke Azaghal drove a knife into his belly, and so wounded him that he fled the field, and the beasts of Angband in dismay followed after him. Then the dwarves raised up the body of Azaghal, and bore it away, and with slow steps they walked behind, singing a dirge in deep voices, as it were a funeral pomp in their country, and gave no heed more to their foes, and none dared to stay them. But now in the western battle, Fingon and Turgon were assailed by a tide of foes thrice greater than all the force that was left to them. Gothmog, lord of Balrog's, high captain of Angband, was come, and he drove a dark wedge between the elven hosts, surrounding King Fingon, and thrusting Turgon and Húrin aside towards the fen of Serech. Then he turned upon Fingon. That was a grim meeting. At last Fingon stood alone with his guard dead about him, and he fought with Gothmog, until another Balrog came behind, and cast a thong of fire about him. Then Gothmog hewed him with his black axe, and a white flame sprang up from the helm of Fingon as it was cloven. Thus fell the High King of the Noldor, and they beat him into the dust with their maces, and his banner, blue and silver, they trod into the mire of his blood. The field was lost. But still Húrin and Huor and the remnants of the house of Hador stood firm with Turgon of Gondolin, and the hosts of Morgoth could not yet win the pass of Sirion. Then Húrin spoke to Turgon, saying, "Go now, lord, while time is, for in you lives the last hope of the Eldar, and while Gondolin stands, Morgoth shall still no fear in his heart." But Turgon answered, "Not long now can Gondolin be hidden, and being discovered it must fall." Then Huor spoke and said, "Yet if it stands but a little while, then out of your house shall come the hope of elves and men. This I say to you, lord, with the eyes of death, though we part here forever, and I shall not look on your white walls again, from you and from me a new star shall arise. Farewell." And Maeglin, Turgon's sister's son, who stood by, heard these words, and did not forget them. But he said nothing. Then Turgon took the counsel of Húrin and Huor, and summoning all that remained of the host of Gondolin, and such of Fingon's people as could be gathered, he retreated towards the pass of Sirion. And his captains, Ecthelion and Glorfindel, guarded the flanks to right and left, so that none of the enemy should pass them by. But the men of Dor Lomin held the rear guard as Húrin and Huor desired, for they did not wish in their hearts to leave the Northlands. And if they could not win back to their homes, there they would stand to the end. Thus was the treachery of Uldor redressed, and of all the deeds of war that the fathers of men wrought in behalf of the Eldar, the last stand of the men of Dor Lomin is most renowned. So it was that Turgon fought his way southward, until, coming behind the guard of Húrin and Huor, he passed down Sirion and escaped. And he vanished into the mountains, and was hidden from the eyes of Morgoth. But the brothers drew the remnants of the men of the house of Hador about them, and foot by foot they withdrew, until they came behind the fen of Serech, and had the stream of Rivil before them. There they stood, and gave way no more. Then all the hosts of Angband swarmed against them, and they bridged the stream with their dead, and encircled the remnant of Hithlam as a gathering tide about a rock. There as the sun westered on the 6th day, and the shadow of Ered Wethrin grew dark, Huor fell, pierced with a venomed arrow in his eye, and all the valiant men of Hador were slain about him in a heap. And the orcs hewed their heads, and piled them as a mound of gold in the sunset. Last of all, Húrin stood alone. Then he cast aside his shield, and wielded an axe two-handed, and it is sung that the axe smoked in the black blood of the troll god of Gothmog, until it withered. And each time that he slew, Húrin cried, Aure and Tulava! Day shall come again! 70 times he uttered that cry, but they took him at last alive by the command of Morgoth. For the orcs grappled him with their hands, which clung to him still, though he hewed off their arms. And ever their numbers were renewed, until at last he fell buried beneath them. Then Gothmog bound him, and dragged him to Angband with mockery. Thus ended Nirneath Arnoediad, as the sun went down beyond the sea. Night fell in Hithlam, and there came a great storm of wind out of the west. Great was the triumph of Morgoth, and his design was accomplished in a manner after his own heart. For men took the lives of men, and betrayed the Eldar, and fear and hatred were aroused among those that should have been united against him. From that day, the hearts of the elves were estranged from men, save only those of the 3 houses of the Edain. The realm of Fingon was no more, and the sons of Feanor wandered as leaves before the wind. Their arms were scattered and their league broken, and they took to a wild and woodland life beneath the feet of Ered Lindon, mingling with the green elves of Osirian, bereft of their power and glory of old. In Brethil, some few of the Haladin yet dwelt in the protection of their woods, and Handir, son of Haldir, was their lord. But to Hithlam came back never one of Fingon's host, nor any of the men of Hador's house, nor any tidings of the battle and the fate of their lords. But Morgoth sent thither the Easterlings that had served him, denying them the rich lands of Beleriand which they coveted, and he shut them in Hithlam, and forbade them to leave it. Such was the reward he gave them for their treachery to Maethros, to plunder and harass the old and the women and the children of Hador's people. The remnant of the Eldar of Hithlam were taken to the mines of the north and labored there as thralls, save some that eluded him and escaped into the wilds and the mountains. The orcs and the wolves went freely through all the north, and came ever further southward into Beleriand, even as far as Nantathren, the land of the willows, and the borders of Osirian, and none was safe in field or wild. Doriath indeed remained, and the halls of Nargothrond were hidden. But Morgoth gave small heed to them, either because he knew little of them, or because their hour was not yet come in the deep purpose of his malice. Many now fled to the havens and took refuge behind Círdan's walls, and the mariners passed up and down the coast and harried the enemy with swift landings. But in the next year, ere the winter was come, Morgoth sent great strength over Hithlum and Nevrast, and they came down the rivers Brithon and Nenning, and ravaged all the Falas, and besieged the walls of Brithombar and Eglarest. Smiths and miners and makers of fire they brought with them, and they set up great engines, and valiantly though they were resisted, they broke the walls at last. Then the havens were laid in ruin, and the tower of Barad Nimras cast down, and the most part of Círdan's people were slain or enslaved. But some went aboard ship and escaped by sea, and among them was Iranian Gilgalad, the son of Fingol, whom his father had sent to the havens after the Dagor Bragolach. This remnant sailed with Círdan south to the Isle of Balar, and they made a refuge for all that could come thither, for they kept a foothold also at the mouths of Sirion, and there many light and swift ships lay hid in the creeks and waters, where the reeds were dense as a forest. And when Torgon heard of this, he sent again his messengers to Sirion's mouths, and besought the aid of Círdan the shipwright. At the bidding of Torgon, Círdan built 7 swift ships, and they sailed out into the west. But no tidings of them came ever back to Balar, save of one, and the last. The mariners of that ship toiled long in the sea, and returning at last in despair, they foundered in a great storm within sight of the coasts of Middle-earth. But one of them was saved by Ulmo from the wrath of Osse, and the waves bore him up and cast him ashore in Nevrast. His name was Varonwe, and he was one of those that Torgon sent forth as messengers from Gondolin. Now the thought of Morgoth dwelt ever upon Torgon, for Torgon had escaped him. Of all his foes, that one whom he most desired to take or to destroy, and that thought troubled him and marred his victory. For Torgon of the mighty house of Fingolfin was now by right king of all the Noldor, and Morgoth feared and hated the house of Fingolfin, because they had the friendship of Ulmo his foe, and because of the wounds that Fingolfin gave him with his sword. And most of all his kin, Morgoth feared Torgon. For of old in Valinor his eye had lighted upon him, and whenever he drew near a shadow had fallen on his spirit, foreboding that in some time that yet lay hidden from Torgon ruin should come to him. Therefore Húrin was brought before Morgoth, for Morgoth knew that he had the friendship of the king of Gondolin. But Húrin defied him and mocked him. Then Morgoth cursed Húrin and Morwen and their offspring, and set a doom upon them of darkness and sorrow. And taking Húrin from prison, he set him in a chair of stone upon a high place of Thangorodrim. There he was bound by the power of Morgoth. And Morgoth, standing beside him, cursed him again. And he said, "Sit now there, and look out upon the lands where evil and despair shall come upon those whom thou lovest. Thou hast dared to mock me, and to question the power of Melkor, master of the fates of Arda. Therefore, with my eyes thou shalt see, and with my ears thou shalt hear, and never shalt thou move from this place until all is fulfilled unto its bitter end." And even so it came to pass. But it is not said that Húrin asked ever of Morgoth either mercy or death, for himself or for any of his kin. By the command of Morgoth, the orcs with great labor gathered all the bodies of those who had fallen in the great battle, and all their harness and weapons, and piled them in a great mound in the midst of Anfaugith. And it was like a hill that could be seen from afar. Howthen Ndengin, the elves named it, the Hill of Slain. And Howthen Nirnaeth, the Hill of Tears. But grass came there, and grew again, long and green upon that hill, alone in all the desert that Morgoth made. And no creature of Morgoth trod thereafter upon the earth beneath which the swords of the Eldar and the Edain crumbled into rust. The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. Edited by Christopher Tolkien. Read by Martin Shaw. Of Turin-Turamba. Rhiann, daughter of Belegund, was the wife of Huor, son of Galdor. And she was wedded to him 2 months before he went with Hurin his brother to the Nirnaeth Arnoediad. When no tidings came of her lord, she fled into the wild. But she was aided by the grey elves of Mithrin, and when her son Tuor was born, they fostered him. Then Rhiann departed from Hithlum, and going to the Howthen and Dengin, she laid herself down upon it and died. Morwen, daughter of Baragund, was the wife of Hurin, lord of Dor-Lomin, and their son was Turin, who was born in the year that Beren Echamian came upon Luthien in the forest of Neldoreth. A daughter they had also, who was called Lalaith, which is laughter. And she was beloved by Turin, her brother. But when she was 3 years old, there came a pestilence to Hithlum, born on an evil wind out of Angband, and she died. Now after the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, Morwen abode still in Dor-Lomin, for Turin was but 8 years old, and she was again with child. Those days were evil, for the Easterlings that came into Hithlum despised the remnant of the people of Hador, and they oppressed them, and took their lands and their goods, and enslaved their children. But so great was the beauty and majesty of the Lady of Dor-Lomin, that the Easterlings were afraid, and dared not to lay hands upon her or her household. And they whispered among themselves, saying that she was perilous, and a witch skilled in magic, and in league with the elves. Yet she was now poor, and without aid, save that she was succored secretly by a kinswoman of Hurin, named Earin, whom Brodda, an Easterling, had taken as his wife. And Morwen feared greatly that Turin would be taken from her and enslaved. Therefore it came into her heart to send him away in secret, and to beg King Thingol to harbour him. For Beren, son of Barahir, was her father's kinsman, and he had been, moreover, a friend of Hurin, ere evil befell. Therefore, in the autumn of the year of lamentation, Morwen sent Turin forth over the mountains, with 2 aged servants, bidding them find entry, if they could, into the kingdom of Doria. Thus was the fate of Turin woven, which is full told in that lay that is called Narn Ihin Hurin, the tale of the children of Hurin, and is the longest of all the lays that speak of those days. Here that tale is told in brief, for it is woven with the fate of the Silmarils and of the elves, and it is called The Tale of Grief, for it is sorrowful, and in it are revealed most evil works of Morgoth Bauglir. In the first beginning of the year, Morwen gave birth to her child, the daughter of Húrin, and she named her Nianor, which is mourning. But Turin and his companions, passing through great perils, came at last to the borders of Doriath, and there they were found by Beleg Strongbow, chief of the March Wardens of King Thingol, who led them to Menegroth. Then Thingol received Turin, and took him even to his own fostering, in honor of Húrin the Steadfast. For Thingol's mood was changed towards the houses of the elf friends. Thereafter messengers went north to Hithlum, bidding Morwen leave Dor-Lomin, and return with them to Doriath. But still she would not leave the house in which she had dwelt with Húrin. And when the elves departed, she sent with them the dragon helm of Dor-Lomin, greatest of the heirlooms of the house of Hador. Turin grew fair and strong in Doriath, but he was marked with sorrow. For 9 years he dwelt in Thingol's halls, and during that time his grief grew less, for messengers went at times to Hithlum, and returning they brought better tidings of Morwen and Nianor. But there came a day when the messengers did not return out of the north, and Thingol would send no more. Then Turin was filled with fear for his mother and his sister, and in grimness of heart he went before the king and asked for mail and sword. And he put on the dragon helm of Dor-Lomin, and went out to battle on the marches of Doriath, and became the companion in arms of Beleg Cuthalion. And when 3 years had passed, Turin returned again to Menegroth. But he came from the wild, and was unkempt, and his gear and garments were way-worn. Now one there was in Doriath, of the people of the Nandor, high in the councils of the king. Seoros was his name. He had long begrudged to Turin the honor he received as Thingol's foster son, and seated opposite to him at the board, he taunted him, saying, "If the men of Hithlum are so wild and fell, of what sort are the women of that land? Do they run like deer, clad only in their hair?" Then Turin, in great anger, took up a drinking vessel and cast it at Seoros, and he was grievously hurt. On the next day, Seoros waylaid Turin as he set out from Menegroth to return to the marches. But Turin overcame him and set him to run naked as a hunted beast through the woods. Then Seoros, fleeing in terror before him, fell into the chasm of a stream, and his body was broken on a great rock in the water. But others coming saw what was done, and Mablung was among them. And he bade Turin return with him to Menegroth, and abide the judgment of the king, seeking his pardon. But Turin, deeming himself now an outlaw and fearing to be held captive, refused Mablung's bidding, and turned swiftly away. And passing through the girdle of Melion, he came into the woods west of Sirion. There he joined himself to a band of such houseless and desperate men as could be found in those evil days lurking in the wild. And their hands were turned against all who came in their path, elves and men and orcs. But when all that had befallen was told and searched out before Thingol, the king pardoned Turin, holding him wronged. In that time, Beleg Strongbow returned from the north marches and came to Menegroth, seeking him. And Thingol spoke to Beleg, saying, "I grieve, Cuthalion, for I took Húrin's son as my son, and so he shall remain, unless Húrin himself should return out of the shadows to claim his own. I would not have any say that Turin was driven forth unjustly into the wild, and gladly would I welcome him back, for I loved him well." And Beleg answered, "I will seek Turin until I find him, and I will bring him back to Menegroth, if I can, for I love him also." Then Beleg departed from Menegroth, and far across Beleriand he sought in vain for tidings of Turin through many perils. But Turin abode long among the outlaws, and became their captain, and he named himself Nathan the Wronged. Very warily they dwelt in the wooded lands south of Tegli. But when a year had passed since Turin fled from Doriath, Beleg came upon their lair by night. It chanced that at that time Turin was gone from the camp, and the outlaws seized Beleg and bound him and treated him cruelly, for they feared him as a spy of the king of Doriath. But Turin returning, and seeing what was done, was stricken with remorse for all their evil and lawless deeds, and he released Beleg, and they renewed their friendship, and Turin forswore thenceforward war or plunder against all save the servants of Angband. Then Beleg told Turin of King Thingol's pardon, and he sought to persuade him by all means that he might to return with him to Doriath, saying that there was great need of his strength and valor on the north marches of the realm. Of late the orcs have found a way down out of Tower Nufuin, he said, and they have made a road through the pass of Anach. I do not remember it, said Turin. Never did we go so far from the borders, said Beleg, but you have seen the peaks of the Crissaegrim far off, and to the east the dark walls of the Gorgoroth. Anach lies between, above the high springs of Minden, a hard and dangerous road. Yet many come by it now, and Dimbar, which used to be in peace, is falling under the Black Hand, and the men of Brethil are troubled. We are needed there. But in the pride of his heart, Turin refused the pardon of the king, and the words of Beleg were of no avail to change his mood. And he, for his part, urged Beleg to remain with him in the lands west of Sirion, but that Beleg would not do. And he said, Hard you are, Turin, and stubborn. Now the turn is mine. If you wish indeed to have the strong bow beside you, look for me in Dimbar, for thither I shall return. On the next day Beleg set out, and Turin went with him a bowshot from the camp, but he said nothing. Is it farewell then, son of Hurin? Said Beleg. Then Turin looked out westward, and he saw far off the great height of Amon Ruth. And unwitting of what lay before him, he answered, You have said, Seek me in Dimbar, but I say, Seek for me on Amon Ruth, else this is our last farewell. Then they parted in friendship, yet in sadness. Now Beleg returned to the 1,000 caves, and coming before Thingol and Melian, he told them of all that had befallen, save only of his evil handling by Turin's companions. Then Thingol sighed, and he said, What more would Turin have me do? Give me leave, Lord, said Beleg, and I will guard him and guide him as I may. Then no man shall say that elven words are lightly spoken, nor would I wish to see so great a good run to nothing in the wild. Then Thingol gave Beleg leave to do as he would, and he said,